He should have been fucking fired and put out to pasture. Maybe shot in the face. Well, it's time to finally get back into some more community. It took about 3-4 weeks off because of, the impending move and everything. And so I just did it. And plus, I just wanted to blow through season 4 because goddamn, that shit was horrible. But in the time in between, I've had some. I did one episode as part of that batch. I did one episode of season 5. But now I've had plenty of time to think about the fact that Jeff's gonna be a teacher, and I want to ask you a question. Who was the worst teacher you ever had? Whether we're talking grade school, high school, or if you went to college, who was the worst teacher you had? Put them in your mind. Like conceptualize the worst fucking teacher you had. Okay, you got them in your mind, all right? Now, here's my question: were they the worst because they were a fucking asshole, or were they the worst because they were lazy? Because those are the only two ways you can be a super bad. You can be the worst. Now you can have mediocre teachers. You can have great teachers. Obviously, you got mediocre teachers, but we're talking about the worst teacher you ever had. You probably, if you went to college, you probably had close to 50 different teachers, maybe more. Like it's hard for me to just do an estimate. Each year you have 8, 10 teachers, maybe. So that's 80 just in grade school. So I think I'm way underestimating actually. Because it probably you might end up with a couple hundred teachers, especially because I changed schools 3 times in one year. When I in my 8th grade year, I changed school twice. Right, I was in 3 different schools. So for one year, so that's 30 teachers right there. So I have a lot of experience with that. But of all those teachers, the worst, it's either going to be because they're a fucking asshole or because they're lazy. The worst teacher I ever had that was an asshole was, I mentioned 8th grade, right? So I already switched schools twice. And so this is my third school, and it was probably February. So we had like 4 months left. And so they were 2/3 of the way through the school year, and some new student shows up, right? And so I'm going around, I'm in each class, and the person that told me go up to the teacher at the beginning of every class, your first day, and introduce yourself and let them know what's going on, right? And I assume they got a memo, but they wanted me to put a face to a name, right? And so I did that with all the other teachers. But when I walked in, like the second I walked in, I was a little bit behind everybody else because I had been talking to the previous teacher, right? So everybody else was, and as I walked in, this teacher, he said, everybody sit down, we'll get started, right? I walked over to him and I said, hi, I didn't even get a chance to get my name out. And he says, I said, sit down! I was like, oh, okay. So I've identified the asshole. And he was just a fucking asshole. He'd yell at people. Super strict. Did anything he didn't like. You basically cuss you out. And then he was quick with the paddle. This back when they could paddle students, right? Yeah, think about it, 8th grade, you're what, 12, 13? They're still paddling you? That's getting pretty old for that shit. But yeah, he paddled me, I think, at least 3 times, maybe 4 times. Because, get this. His last name is Rogers. He was Mr. Rogers. Boy, you better believe, you know what kind of person I am. You better believe I made fun of him every fucking chance I got. I had everybody else, like, obviously the other kids were aware of Mr. Rogers. They had made the connection. But I would be singing his songs and talking about, don't you want to be my neighbor and shit. He'd be walking past. I'd say it under my breath, just enough for him to hear it. And he would let it go most of the time, but every now and then he would just say, all right, come on, let's go. Let's get this paddling over with. Like I said, he must have paddled me 3 or 4 times. Like, I just wouldn't let up, man, because he made a horrible fucking first impression. I was just trying to fucking introduce myself. Like I had been instructed to do. I was following orders. Yes, he said sit down when I first came in, but I was following orders and nobody else had a problem with it. Right? So we were off on the wrong foot, and it was just like, it was a war for 4 months. Like, he was a fucking, I wouldn't back down, and he wouldn't back down. He would send me to the principal's office, and everybody knew that he was a fucking asshole. So the principal just had me sit there for 10 minutes and send me back to class, right? Like, he had a conversation with me. He said, look, can you try to work with him? He's got a couple years left. He has tenure. We can't get rid of him. I don't remember if he used those exact words, but he was definitely, like, gave the impression. Now that I think about it, I doubt he would have, like, used those bald-faced terminology. Like, we can't get rid of him. But he definitely made me aware that, and he was a great principal. Like, he made me aware that, like, he understood where I was coming from, and he was asking me to do him a favor by just trying to get along, even though it's very difficult, right? And it did have an effect. Like I did dial back after every one of these visits, right? You know, because the guy he wasn't mad, he wasn't yelling at me. He was like, you know, it was clear they were just waiting to run out the clock on his son bitch so they could get rid of him. He was a fucking dinosaur, right? Yeah, he was late 50s at that point, and which means he probably started teaching in the 50s. You know what I mean? So we're talking about somebody who was teaching in 1955. Think about how much the world changed from 1955 to 1985. The world changed a lot, right? The school changed a lot. So he was one of those dinosaurs. So it just, you know, it was just a 4-month war. Like, I didn't get along with the son bitch. And he was the worst asshole teacher I had. I've had other assholes. There was a guy I had in college. Just a dick. He was just a sarcastic, passive aggressive dick. He would just make comments, man. He would never yell at you, but he would just make these sideways ass comments and shit and belittle you all the time. He's always insulting people, but does it in a very fucking clever way. He's one of these clever ass motherfuckers. Got a thesaurus stuck up his ass. That type of motherfucker, right? So, you know, he was just petty and vindictive and a bitch made motherfucker. It didn't matter how good you did in class, you were catching it, right? Like, he didn't give a shit. So he's just an asshole. But he wasn't the worst. The worst was Mr. Rogers. But that's the worst asshole. The actual worst teacher was because they were lazy. You know, they're just lazy. Like, you know, just wouldn't look up facts. Would be late returning papers. So you didn't know where you were in the class. Like, sometimes, like, this motherfucker he would fucking procrastinate. And then probably somebody above him got on his ass. And then one Monday, he would come in and he'd be handing back like 18 graded papers, right? And shit. Like, you know, take 2 weeks to return your quiz to you and shit. He'd be like, yeah, I'm sure you guys did fine on the quiz. We'll just keep moving and shit. So he was like, you know, and the bigger problem was, you would think, okay, usually that kind of person would be a real asshole if you didn't turn in your work on time, right? But think about it. If you don't turn in your work on time, that means he doesn't have to grade it. You know what I mean? So there was just a very lax policy about turning in your work. So we would be put in a position, because you actually, even though it's irritating, you need somebody to be on your ass to get your work done. So we'd be in a position in the last few weeks of school. Like, we had like 5 or 6 missed assignments we hadn't turned in yet. You'd be like, oh, by the way, just to let you guys know, like, you're going to be getting an F if you don't turn these things in. It's like, God damn, man. It's been so fucking long. You know me, like, with my fucking, how I be. Like, I have a strong work ethic. And even I get behind on shit. And it was the same in high school. And, like, I would prioritize. My problem is I prioritize. So, say, I was going to be going into a field like architecture, right? So math was crucial. So I would always prioritize math. So the writing assignments, ironically, since I started out as a writer, you know, the writing assignments, stuff like that, I would procrastinate on. And you'll notice that, like, you know, there was the videos that get the most views, I tend to try to get out faster. Even though these community reactions don't always get out very fast. But I do prioritize it, like, whatever's getting the most views, I'm going to prioritize. So things that are, like, you know, not getting very many views, like Outer Banks or something like that, it's just going to fall by the wayside for a couple weeks. That's just the way it is, right? You know, so that's where I was in school. And so this was a writing class, right? It was history/writing, I think. It was historical fiction or something. It was something to do with, because we had to write a lot of essays, but it was history, but it wasn't ever just like, you know, this happened on this date. You know, it wasn't that kind of shit. You know, the Magna Carta was signed on this date. It was more, you know, you had to read somebody's diary and then summarize, like, what are the most historically relevant points in it, whatever. It was something abstract, right? Like, it was a little bit deeper. But it was in high school. But it just, you know, it wasn't a priority. So, and because he wasn't on our ass, I was literally, like, with 2 weeks left to go in the semester, I was like 6 writing assignments behind. And obviously I knew conceptually, intellectually, I knew I would have to turn these in, but he wasn't on my ass. He wasn't saying, hey, you know, you're going to be marked down 5%. You know, there was none of that. It was just so lackadaisical, right? So he was actually my worst teacher because he was lazy. You know, if you say, it's not about the experience when sitting in class. It's about what do you learn when you leave that class. What do you know that you didn't know before? That's how you grade a teacher. So yes, the asshole, Mr. Rogers, was the worst experience sitting in the class. But you know what? I fucking nailed the material because I wanted to stick it to him. I wanted to turn in my fucking pristine. It's the best work I've ever done in my life. I would turn in this shit. I would do like extra work and just make sure run because he was a science teacher, right? My fucking experiments would be immaculate. My papers, my research would be fucking, be all the sources plus an extra source and shit. Like my shit, like I got an excellent fucking grade in that class. It was like, I think it was like 106, right? You only go to 100, but then with like extra credit, you do a little bit bonus shit. And here's the thing, I'll say this about this son of a bitch. He fucking graded you fair. If you turn in good work, you got a good grade. No matter how much of a dick he was, he didn't play favorites. He fucking hated my guts. He always graded my shit. That's why I did it. I did my shit. I turned in excellent work because I wanted him to grade me down so I could take that paper to the principal and say, I want you to evaluate this in an unbiased way and tell me he didn't fuck me over because he doesn't like me. I wanted this. And he knew I wanted it. So he fucking graded me fair. But I heard this from the other students too. Like, he was always a very fair grader, man. He was just an asshole. But he was never biased, man. There would be students he would get along with. He liked a couple students and would like curry favor, and he would always call on them first and shit. But if they turned in some bad shit, they got graded down, man. I'll say this for the old punk ass, bitch ass motherfucker. His integrity was beyond reproach when it came to the classwork. I'll say that for the son of a bitch, right? So, because of that, and because I wanted to stick it to him, I wanted him to have to put 102% on my paper when he hated see my name and then have to write fucking 102 right underneath that shit. I did my best work and I learned a lot in that fucking science class, man. I learned my ass off in that class. The previous fucking, when I transferred over, I was averaging about a fucking 79 or some shit. Came out of that, you add all together that particular semester. Actually, yeah, they didn't add together. I came in on a clean semester, I think. That's how it worked. Or it's just a couple weeks of that semester, whatever. But I came in, had gotten a 79 in the previous semester, got 104 or some shit in this one. So I learned my ass off. So he's not a bad teacher. He motivated me in a very shitty way, and he should have been fucking fired and put out to pasture. Maybe shot in the face, as they do with these old ass animals. But he was a good, I learned. That's how we have to evaluate these teachers. We have to evaluate these teachers based on the fact, how much did you learn? When you walk out of that class, how much do you know? So if we're using that metric, then my worst teacher ever was that lazy motherfucker. Lazy, just inspired. He was so lazy, he inspired us to be lazy. I didn't learn shit, man. I learned nothing in that fucking class. I was rushing. I was cutting a bunch of corners and rushing. And, they didn't have fucking Wikipedia back then, but, they definitely had some college students that you could, there was a college right across. It was like a community college. It was right across the street from our fucking high school, right? Motherfuckers would go over there, catch the college students in the fucking park, and you knew who to go to. Hey, man, let me copy your paper. And it'd be like, the assignments would be different every year. So it'd be like, for instance, Sir Walter Raleigh had a couple journals, right? So their assignment may have been, what did he say in his journals about the trade? What could you glean about the trade market in his time period from his journals? And mine might be, what could you glean from the war that happened? I don't remember now, but like, it may have been the French-American War, or it may have been the Revolutionary War whenever he was around, right? See, I didn't learn shit in that class, so I don't remember. But so mine would be, what could you glean from the war? So you can't copy a paper, but their paper, like their research, they had a shit ton of notes, would still help you cut some corners. And so you go over there, you give them like a $5 bill or some shit. It'll say, okay, here, and they feel better about it because you're not straight copying the shit because it's a different assignment every year, right? So, but it was very helpful. So like, when you're doing that, when you're copying somebody else's notes and you're incorporating that in what you're doing, you got the sources. That's another thing too, because like, if you're doing this on your own, okay, what are the best books that talk about his journals and what they glean? Like, maybe he was full of shit in this thing, and this book tells you, here's the elaboration, here's the context of what he said in this journal. You would have to do this side research, right? And so if they've already done it, they would tell you, here's the best books for Sir Walter Raleigh. Here's the best books for George Washington or whatever, right? Ben Franklin. And so they've already done the legwork. It's worth the $5, right? So that way you're not reading 8 books to find out which 2 books are good. And if I was reading those 8 books, I would have fucking learned a lot, right? But I didn't do that because I'm trying to cut corners because I'm down to the last 2 weeks. So that's the point, right? Like, it's just, he was a terrible ass teacher. He inspired you to fucking cut corners and procrastinate and wait till the last fucking second. And rush out some bullshit. And get this. Because he's lazy, he's going to give you a good grade on your shitty ass fucking essay. Because he ain't trying to read that shit and check all your sources. I knew motherfuckers would literally just make up shit. They wouldn't make up historical shit, but they would say, here's the context I found in these 2 books, and maybe those books didn't exist, or that motherfucker in those books didn't say that shit. He would have never fucking known that, right? Yeah. Because you had to have like 3 sources or whatever, right? They didn't want to even take time to read anything, they just wanted to make some shit up. And they may not get A's, but they would get decent grades, but we would walk out of there not knowing a fucking thing. That's the worst teacher I've ever had. I'm curious what you think. And obviously, like, this intro's going on so fucking long. Like, clear it's going to be its own video. As usual, I know that about 6 minutes, and I'm like, fuck it, I'm just going to keep talking. So this will no longer be an intro to the second episode of Season 5. But I am curious, though, because I feel like, and I'm going to feel really stupid if Jeff doesn't teach a second in class, right? But I feel like with him being a teacher, I think he's going to be the lazy, corner-cutting, shitty teacher. He would be the worst teacher you've ever had if you had him in community college. I believe that. That's my point in all this. That's why I brought all this up. I was thinking, what kind of teacher would he be? He's going to be a shitty teacher. He's going to be like that fucking history teacher. So I'd love to hear your comments, like, what are your terrible-ass teachers you've had? What makes them bad? Maybe there's a category I'm missing, because I'm thinking either asshole or lazy, but maybe there is another category. I can't think of one. But let me know if you think there's another thing that makes somebody a bad teacher. So, I mean, other than, like, if they're fucking their students. Like, I never experienced that. I never knew about that happening in one of my classes. So, like, so I don't know, like, how prevalent that is. It's very prevalent in Hollywood. How prevalent is that in real life? Who knows? But let me know if you can think of another category. Having said all this, I'm going to go ahead and do this as a separate video and just get, next time I record will be that, reaction to the second episode.